So we're going to go over how to install the SDK on your workstation itself. We're going to be following the instructions on the GitHub wiki, so you can follow along on there. Just go to our homepage and getting started, set up, and installing the Research SDK. Now, you need to make sure that you've done the two previous steps of installing Ubuntu and ROS, and you configure your development workstation to access GitHub. These are important because the installing the SDK part depends on those being properly set up, and if you run into trouble, you probably should check those previous steps. So I'm going to open up a new terminal, and this will be for installing the 0.70 version onto your workstation. Install. I'm going to start with some prerequisites for the installation process. If you haven't installed them before, they'll take a little bit longer. Now we're going to make a new folder for our Catkin workspace, or our ROS workspace, as we use the term here. They're the same thing, just convention. And we're going to make a subfolder, the source directory. This is common to all Catkin workspaces. And now we're going to cd, change the directory into that subfolder of the ROS workspace we just created. And you'll see it's all empty. And we're going to use the workspace tool to initialize our Catkin workspace. Now all it did was make a blank new workspace. So we're going to tell it what we want to install. To do that, we're going to use the ROS install file that sits in the Baxter repo on GitHub. We can do that directly from the terminal command line by pointing at that file itself. So you can get this link from the tutorial. Or by going to the repository itself. So what this has done is told the workspace that it's going to have these new repositories and these ROS packages added when we do a workspace tool update. So you're going to run the workspace tool update function, and it's going to download all the repositories themselves. You want to make sure that this actually completes properly. If it doesn't, you're going to want to go back to the previous steps of the installation process and make sure your GitHub and your SSH keys are set up properly. This has to do with how the links and the URLs are currently set up to download the SDK repositories itself. So once it's done, you want to make sure that the repositories are all in this folder. You should make sure they're in the ROS workspace and in the source subdirectory of that ROS workspace. It's important that you're not in the actual ROS workspace itself, and that you've actually downloaded the repositories and they exist here now. So we're going to go back up to our Catkin workspace itself, because in order to make and compile these packages, we need to be in this top directory. We're then going to source the ROS environment itself based from the ROS install. After that, you should be able to check that your ROS path is properly set up, and we're going to run catkin make to compile all the packages and build all the ROS packages and messages. This will take a minute depending on your computer, but once it's done, you should see that now there's a devel and a build folder. We can also do a catkin make install for some specific move it related and other compiled programs. So the next thing we're going to do is copy up our helper script from the Baxter repository, the baxter.sh, which we'll use for a convenience script to set up our ROS environment, our Baxter SDK. So we'll copy the baxter.sh into our current directory, the ROS workspace. And then we're going to edit this file to point to our specific robot and our computer setup so that we can always source that and set up our SDK terminal and shell environment automatically. You can use whatever editor you want here. We're going to use gedit just because it's simple. We're going to open it up in the background with the ampersand. So what you're going to want to do when you open this is scroll down to get to the user ROS environment variables section and look for your Baxter hostname. So this should be the hostname of your robot itself. By default, your hostname will be equal to the serial number on the back of the robot. If you changed it, you can edit it here. So for us, it's currently 011402P0004.local. Now, you want to remember the .local. This is important because this means that you're on the same subnet and your robot can see you and you can see your robot. You should be able to ping the robot at this address. So if we go back to our terminal, we can see ping 011402P004.local, and we get a response. So we know we're all set up. The second thing we're going to do is set up our IP address. Now, to find that, you can either use the network manager or you can use ifconfig. You want to make sure that you check the interface, the network interface, and that you find the proper one. So we're connected to our robot over our Ethernet port. So we're going to use this IP address. So we're going to copy that and paste it inside the quotes. Now, it's very important that you use either your IP address or your hostname. You do not have both of them set. The only qualification with using your IP address is if your IP address changes, you're going to want to change this value. Now we're going to save it. Besides changing IP address, this is the only time you'll need to edit this. So we can now, whenever we want to talk to Baxter, we can run the Baxter.sh script, and it'll automatically set up our ROS environment. And we call this the SDK environment or shell. You can tell you're pointing to your robot over here, and this is the ROS master URI. You can also tell that all your ROS environment variables have been set up by searching for ROS. Again, you want to make sure your ROS master URI is set to the robot.local, your ROS IP is set, or your ROS hostname, but not both. At this point, you're all set and should be able to talk to the robot. You can run ROS node list to see all the programs running, and you can run one of the examples itself, like the enable robot tool in Baxter Tools. With a -E for enable. All right, now you set up your robot and enjoy running the examples.